Venir. Et nous accueillons maintenant Jayne Warman. Jayne, tout le monde la connaît. C'est une amie de Cézanne et d'Aix-en-Provence. Elle est coprésidente de la société Cézanne. Elle a collaboré avec John Rewald sur ses nombreuses publications à partir de 1979 et jusqu'en 1994. C'est quelqu'un, donc, en tant qu'historienne de l'art et conférencière, consultante et auteur, qui est très dynamique dans son domaine et connaît parfaitement bien le sujet cézannien. C'est elle donc qui a mis en place, avec David Nash et avec Walter Feckenfeld, le catalogue en ligne. Et c'est grâce à elle et à ce trio que ce catalogue en ligne, depuis maintenant quelques années, est géré et sera géré ici depuis Aix-en-Provence, dans la ferme. Donc un grand merci, Jane, pour tout ce que tu fais et continues à faire pour Aix et pour Cézanne.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to the marvelous team who organized such a fascinating symposium. I've learned a great deal, I must say. Can you hear me okay? My voice is a little, yeah, hurting. And so the story of the Cezanne Catalogue Raisonne continues as one of ongoing discovery, collaboration, and technological advancement. Over the decades, scholars and enthusiasts have worked tirelessly to document and understand the full scope of Paul Cézanne's artistic output, continually building upon the work of their predecessors. As we learned earlier this morning, the journey began with, is that number, yeah, is that advance? No, how do you advance? Sorry. Okay, that one. Let's see. As we learned earlier this morning, the journey began with Leonello Venturi's 1936 publication of the first internationally recognized Cézanne catalogue raisonné, followed nearly 4 decades later in 1973 with a focus on the artist's drawings by Adrien Chapuis. 2 more catalogues raisonné were added to the canon in 1983 and 1996, both by John Rewald, whom I'll discuss in a moment, and centering on the watercolors and paintings, respectively. And in 2019, Walter Feilschenfeld, David Nash, and I launched the last of 2 installments of an online version that effectively combined the previous 4 catalogs and allowed for continual updates. Once the long-awaited Cezanne Study Center is open and operating, the online catalog is set to be managed exclusively by the Société Cezanne. The idea of concentrating Cezanne research in the artist's native Aix-en-Provence has been explored for over a century and, one could argue, accelerated in the 1930s when a young German student named John Rewald made the study of Cezanne his life work after a trip to Provence in 1933. There he met the German painter Leo Marschutz, and together they went on motif hunting excursions in the Provençal countryside, equipped with John's newly acquired Leica camera. Their collaborative work led to a greatly expanded understanding of the painter's site-specific landscapes, thus creating a crucial link to the motifs that existed in the artist's day, many of them now lost to urbanization. The strong bond and mutual respect between John and Leo had a nearly 4-decade collaboration. As John once declared, "I owe Leo my fervor for Cezanne." That said, one must not forget that both Venturi and the American painter Earl Loran had also photographed Cezanne sites in the early 1930s, thereby adding another layer of visual evidence of the artist's motifs. John's abiding passion was the study of Cezanne. His doctoral dissertation at the Sorbonne in 1936 on Cezanne's friendship with the writer Émile Zola was awarded a prize from the French Academy. This achievement was all the more notable because at the time, art history studies at the Sorbonne ended with Eugène Delacroix, so that the 24-year-old Rewald had to persuade his professors to accept a doctoral thesis on a more modern painter. In the decades that followed, John compiled and published Cezanne's correspondence and several biographies of the artist, which were translated into numerous languages. He lectured widely on the artist, organized exhibitions, contributed to their catalogues, and became an advisor to some of the most prominent collectors of the day, including Paul Mellon, John Hay Whitney, William Paley, and Henry Perlman, among others. In addition to his work on Cezanne, John published numerous articles and books on other artists, Camille Pissarro, Paul Gauguin, Georges Seurat, Aristide Maillol, to name just a few. His histories of Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, published in 19 became the standard text subjects for decades. In short, a bibliography of John's writings would extend to many, many pages. Locally, it should be noted that in 1954, John and the biographer James Lord were instrumental in preventing a developer from demolishing Cezanne's last studio at Les Louvres. John organized a group of American art enthusiasts, and they together bought the property for a very modest sum to be administered by the University of Aix-Marseille. It should also be noted that the Société Paul Cézanne was founded in 1998 as a homage to John, who, I should also note, is buried in the cemetery here in Aix, very near to the artist he championed. But it is John's publications on Cezanne that set the stage for his becoming the successor to Leonello Venturi. In fact, Venturi had planned a supplement to his 1936 catalog, and about 1/4 of it had already been set in type before his death in 1961. The task of publishing the supplement fell to John, who began in earnest to develop a new catalog using Venturi's manuscripts as a point of departure. John consulted not only with Leo Marschutz during this process, but also with notable scholars such as we've heard, Fritz Novotny, Adrien Chapuis, Robert Ratcliffe, and Lawrence Gowing, to name a few. John decided first to publish a volume of Cezanne's watercolors as a companion of sorts to the Chapuis drawings catalog. By the time I began to work with John as his research assistant in 1979, there was still much work remaining. While preparing the entries, it was clear that there were many inconsistencies and duplications in the data, especially in the exhibition and literature references. I therefore began to inventory this information on individual index cards, thus creating, in essence, a rather rudimentary database. You see where I'm going here, probably. Meanwhile, John continued to write the introduction and the texts. Finally, in 1983, John's watercolor catalog was printed in both English and French within a single volume, and like the Venturi and Chapuis publications, each work was illustrated and randomly sized in black and white. In addition, there were 52 color plates in the introductory essay. The entries were organized more or less chronologically, and an index of owners, a list of exhibitions, topics, and authors quoted, a bibliography, and a concordance were included in the back matter. Because Cezanne chronology is so varied, John chose to acknowledge the proposed dates of execution of other scholars along with his own, as here. He also occasionally cited the interpretations of others, even as they may have conflicted with his own. But there were deficiencies. As Fabienne mentioned, the recto and verso of individual sheets could not be viewed together, only referenced if known. The 80 or so watercolors that are sketchbook pages are rarely associated with a specific carnet. Different papers or watermarks are not identified. And because the work is presented in a single volume, the reader must flip back and forth between the catalog entry and illustration to which it is referred. In spite of some of these drawbacks, the watercolor catalog was very well received and became an important source for scholars, curators, and researchers. Meanwhile, John had been updating, excuse me, the entries for Cezanne's paintings. It turned out that the task was significantly more complicated than we anticipated. With the knowledge that we had gained from the use of the index cards and with the advent of personal computers, a consultant was hired to help us to develop a database that would add more sophisticated cross-checking and cross-referencing capabilities. Some of you may recall that combining images and data on a computer screen was a nascent technology. We had to rely on a separate data processor for the entries, a word processor for the tasks, and a paper maquette for the plates volume, none of which spoke to one another electronically. Notably, John never turned a computer on or an electric typewriter, but composed all of his texts on a manual Underwood typewriter using only his 2 index fingers. It was fabulous, fabulous. The features of the database proved useful, however. Paintings could be searched using various criteria such as new or Venturi number, title or partial title, centimeter dimension, owner, exhibition, or publication. It was also possible to generate a list of owners or works featured in an exhibition, as here, which improved efficiency in our research. When the catalog was prepared for publishing, the individual components, along with photographs to be scanned for the plates volume and text illustrations, had to be sent separately to the publisher for formatting. How very antiquated indeed. Sadly, John's failing health in the early 1990s prevented him from completing the catalog raisonne that he had labored over for 3 decades. By that time, the Swiss scholar Walter Fauschenfeld and I partnered to ensure that John's oeuvre catalog would be realized as he had envisioned it. And it was, at least for the most part. He had drafted only about 2/3 of his commentaries. Nevertheless, John's long-awaited 2-volume work was published 2 years after his death to critical acclaim, and by all accounts provided a rich storehouse of historical narrative and well-researched documentation. One of its principal weaknesses, the works themselves were printed in difficult-to-read black and white images, a mortal offense when color is so consequential to our perception of the artist. John's contribution to art history is certainly well recognized for its solid and well-documented research, coupled with his clear, eloquent prose. He was not given to interpretation or deep theory, but favored an empirical approach to his work. As expressed by his daughter-in-law, Sabine, John identified with the struggles of the artist he wrote about, and he never ceased to do so, despite the fame and success he achieved. Since the publication of John's catalog, the nature of research has been transformed by the internet, and substantial breakthroughs in computer technology have been made. Most significantly, images, text, and data could be combined onto a single screen and easily organized and reorganized. Furthermore, new Cezanne scholarship, source material, and archives, notably those of Ambroise Vollard, the Barnes Foundation, and Paul Rosenberg, had become available and greatly enriched the study of the artist. Major exhibitions were held across a range of themes in the United States, Europe, and Japan. Publications were extensive, and many paintings had changed hands. it became evident that the earlier Catalogues raisonne were clearly very out of date. In 2010, the gallerist David Nash posed the idea to Walter and to me of publishing a volume of Cezanne's paintings in color based on Rewald's 1996 catalog. Thus began a series of very productive conversations. Here we are. We decided to bring John's magnum opus into the 21st century by combining the latest technological advances with an updated version of the Cezanne Catalogue raisonne. It soon became clear that an online catalog was preferable, indeed essential. We began with the paintings. After several unsuccessful attempts at finding a suitable platform, a database and web design team, Panopticon's Roger and Susanna Shepard, was engaged due to their experience with the features necessary for an interactive and comprehensive online catalog raisonne. This system was designed to be expandable to include additional material such as watercolors, drawings, letters, multiple images, conservation reports, links to primary source material, and videos. Our project began by defining features specific to Cezanne's study, and once agreed upon, then entering all of the data from the Rewald volume, 12,000 bibliographic references alone, to entering onto the new platform, which it was a monumental and in truth very tedious task. Our objective was to organize the material so users could readily access key descriptors, retrieve images, and examine the artist's work from multiple perspectives, including motif, size, and collection history. Additionally, we aimed to enable virtual reconstructions of exhibitions with works displayed at their relative sizes, as here, incorporating links to early primary sources such as periodicals and newspapers, and connecting reviews of exhibitions and books has been a significant addition to the website. Enhanced filters and search functionalities available in both French and English provide users with the ability to conduct detailed queries and identify connections. Other data, including dealer stock numbers, condition reports, and images of labels or inscriptions on the stretchers, are documented for future research, but are not publicly available. These are just a few of the many search capabilities of the online catalog. That said, the online catalog raisonne of Cezanne's paintings was launched to the public on November 20, 2014, and became the foundation for our next project, adding the works on paper to the existing database. This phase presented to us a whole new set of issues, such as organizing Chapuis's drawing and Rewald's watercolor catalogs, establishing a framework for single sheets, cut sheets, double-sided sheets, and the artist's 20 sketchbooks, and finally incorporating them into the existing painting catalog with a complex system of links and keywords. We wanted especially to recreate the sketchbooks as they may have originally appeared, as you see on the lower right. The fully integrated catalog was published on January 19, 2019, Cezanne's 180th birthday. It was considered revolutionary at the time and has served as a model for Catalogues raisonne of many other artists since then. In short, the online catalog is meant to serve as a dynamic resource comprising over 3,000 works, offering factual and visual connections, not interpretive articles, much in the spirit of John Rewald. After publication, research and the verification of entries continued. Extensive efforts were undertaken to confirm provenances, acquire improved images. You can see these definitely need to be improved. To identify works featured in earlier exhibitions, and to add further primary source material as it became accessible. Over the years, discussion centered around incorporating the artist's letters into the catalog, creating virtual exhibitions, adding technical reports, addressing the chronology, and digitizing the Venturi archive in Rome and Rewald archives in Washington. Newly discovered, there we go. Newly discovered and accepted works continued to be incorporated, especially drawings and watercolors. And thankfully, Fabienne Ruppin's much anticipated study of the artist's works on paper will soon be available, right, Fabienne? Okay. Which will present a substantial addition to the database and, of course, to scholarship. After many years of measured anticipation, we can now wholeheartedly applaud La Ville d'Aix, which has fully embraced the idea of restoring Paul Cezanne to his rightful place in Aix. Cezanne 2025 has been a triumph in every respect. In addition, the city's interest and continued support of the Cezanne Study Center will be of paramount importance to ensure its future. Numerous challenges lie ahead, however. One of the most critical is to promote engagement among emerging scholars to consider Cezanne as a primary subject of academic inquiry. After all, they will become future experts, though achieving this will require years of concentrated study to be effective. And so the story of the Cezanne catalog will continue. I'm delighted to pass the baton and entrust this significant endeavor to a new generation of Cezanne scholars, confident that they will advance the foundational works of their predecessors. Significant interest in the artist is reflected by the impressive number of visitors to the exhibition at the Musée Granet and Cezanne sites throughout Aix, and by the increase in new registrants for the online catalog, numbering over 2,500 since the beginning of the exhibition. With the myriad unresolved questions and paradoxes that still surround this extraordinary artist, there'll be no lack of material from which to draw. We now have an invaluable opportunity to preserve Cezanne's artistic legacy in the milieu that shaped him and inspired his art. And like you, I am anxious to learn more about the plans for the future of the Cezanne Study Center specifically, and Cezanne study in general. What will that look like, and how can we ensure that it can sustain itself? Thank you.